Good morning, friends. Will you come with me on a little exploration this morning? I'd like to explore why Reiki and practicing the system of Reiki from its Japanese origins is a pathway to radical self-love and how that is going to get us all free. You see, this morning I had one of those really delicious moments where something I was listening to in another person's video just linked up really beautifully with a conversation that I was having with a student in a Reiki 1 class I'm in the midst of teaching yesterday. And that linked up to something that's just been kind of brewing in my heart around some challenges I've been having. And those things all just kind of alchemized into this message that I want to share this morning. And so even though my class starts up again in a little bit here, I decided to jump on and just let myself say what's on my heart before I lose it. So the spark of this alchemy was a video posted this morning by Sonia Renee Taylor. She's a friend of mine and former colleague, and for the past decade plus, she's been building this incredible body of work around radical self-love. And the practice of radical self-love, the way in which that is rooted in our spiritual and emotional and physical lives, and the way in which radical self-love is a pathway to our collective liberatory freedom. And this work is incredible. Her organization, The Body Is Not an Apology, is doing this work in a number of different ways. And if you don't have this in your life right now, you need to get it in your life. So I'm going to put her links down below, her Instagram and the link to her book, The Body Is Not an Apology, which is any minute now going to come out in its second edition and workbook form. And so Sonia was talking about that release and talking about how the second edition just hit the New York Times bestseller list and what that means in terms of the degree to which this consciousness around the need for radical self-love is growing and spreading in our world. And it really, it struck me in that moment, something that I've noticed in the past, but it was just really strong, which is the direct correlation between this work around radical self-love and the specific purpose and intention of practicing the system of Reiki in its original Japanese form, which is rooted on a bed of self-compassion and compassion to others as an outcome of that. And so taking that back a few steps, the form of Reiki that most of us encounter, most of us encounter anywhere really, is a Western form of Reiki that has evolved over time through a really fascinating journey that this practice has made from being a fairly regional kind of practice in Japan in a kind of localized area in a particular time and place, and then journeying from that time and place to America and, through our system of melting pot appropriation and changing of things that we do often from that come to us from other cultures, and creating a dominant form of Reiki, which can be called Western Reiki, that is now the dominant form in the world. And that form focuses almost entirely on the characteristic of healing, and in particular of one person, a Reiki practitioner, healing another person, causing a healing to happen for them. With a wide range of understandings of that and how that works, and where the origin of the healing is actually coming from. Is it the practitioner enacting healing on that person? Is it healing inside that person that gets stimulated by the practitioner? There's a lot of different ways of thinking about that. But the central point is that Western Reiki is about healing other people. And the somewhat controversial perspective that I'd like to put into the conversation is that the purpose of practicing the system of Reiki in its original form had nothing to do directly with healing. The purpose was to remember the wholeness of our true self, was to come back to ourself and to remember our inherent enoughness, our inherent goodness, our inherent wholeness. And to do so through the practice of 5 elements in the system. And that there are many outcomes of practicing that system and going on that journey of remembering the wholeness of our true self. One of which is the experience of the release of, holding on to fear, holding on to anger, holding on to the tensions that those cause in our body, reconnecting with gratitude, reconnecting with our sense of who we are. And therefore, through those mechanisms, we can experience something that we might label as healing. The release of pain, the release of stress, the release of identifying with ourselves as a broken person. And so healing is absolutely an outcome of practicing the system, but it's not the purpose. And that healing comes as a result of living as an embodiment of the precepts of the system, the foundation on which the system was developed, a foundation that is about, well, let me put it this way, a foundation that is based on the experiences that people had over many, many, many years, decades, centuries of working with these practices and observing what the outcomes were in their lives. It's a pathway to enlightenment. It's a pathway to living our lives completely free of the suffering that is caused when we cling on to our anger, our hate, our fear, our sadness, rather than letting those things come through us, teach us what they have to teach us, and then move on. So, the foundation of those precepts is compassion. Firstly, compassion to ourselves, and then compassion to others. Essentially, starting with compassion for ourselves. We must truly be able to be with ourself, compassion, to be with our own passion, our own pain, fully, to be in the wholeness of that, without judgment, without clinging on to it, before we can be with others in whatever they are experiencing. And one of the thing that came up in the class yesterday, that just the light bulb went on this morning as I was listening to Sonia Renee talk, is that compassion, self-compassion and compassion for others, is not the same thing as acquiescence. It is not the same thing as accommodation. Meaning, I can hold deep compassion for myself. I can be with the fullness of my own self. I can love myself. I can be in the relaxation of not having to hate myself, and the freeing up of energy and resources and time in my life that's caused when I'm not, stuck on judging myself and criticizing myself and being in the pain of believing myself to be not enough and not good. I can have compassion for myself, and I can take a real critical look at the mistakes that I make, the harm that I cause as a result of those mistakes, the moments when I maybe even choose to create harm out of my anger, sadness, frustration. I can take an honest look at those things, and I can see that those things are not me. Those things are not the wholeness of my true self. Those are expressions of pain and experiences that I've had that need to be tended, that need to be worked with. And in fact, I cannot adequately, effectively work with those things, take full accountability for that harm done, make amends, and then move on, feeling good about myself. I cannot do any of that if I do not first hold compassion for myself. Similarly, I can hold compassion for someone else who has caused harm to me. I can be with them in some form, even if just in my heart, maybe not with them in person, but I can be with the fullness of who they are, the wholeness of their true self that is inside of them. I can hold love and compassion for that whole true self and still recognize the mistakes that they've made, the harm that they've caused, the choices that they've made to cause harm out of their broken places, out of their anger, their greed, their fear, their sadness. And out of that compassion, out of caring about that whole self that is inside of them, I can best hold them account for those things. I can best name the harm and have the energy to stay in the process of remediating that harm, whether that's just inside of my own self or whether that's with that person. And that right there is kind of where the rubber hits the road around all of us getting free. And that is a practice. When I say I can do those things, I can in a moment. Do I do those things consistently every moment of my life? No. I am not an enlightened being yet. But through this practice, I've learned that it is absolutely possible. And I've had many, many moments of being able to hold that deep compassion for myself or for others and hold accountability inside of that. And everything else flows from that. The cessation of our need to hold on to that which maybe feels familiar, but also that hurts us. The ability to take risks in our life, to move out of painful places and into more abundant places, joyful places. The willingness to actually feel and experience our joy. Have you ever had the experience of like the things that are happening in your life or around you in a given moment are actually really amazing and joyful, but there's a way in which you can't actually fully let yourself experience that joy? Right? Have you ever like had that moment of awareness where you're like, wow, like I should be really happy right now, but I'm not. What is that? Brene Brown had a phrase for that, and I can't for the life of me remember. One of these days I'm going to have to look it up in the book. But the idea is like, it's like joy deferral. It's like, it's a defense mechanism. If we feel that joy, if we let ourselves be fully immersed in that happy moment, we know it's going to end. And our mind is already jumping to that ending point. It's already jumping to the moment when the circumstances change inevitably, because change is the only guaranteed experience in this life. And we know that at some point, the joy, the circumstances that are bringing about that joy and that happiness are going to shift. And we're afraid of that shift from happiness into unhappiness. And so we tamp down, we temper our joy so that we can protect ourselves from the disappointment of that change. And the outlook of radical self-love is the same as the outlook of the system of Reiki practiced from its Japanese origins. That we must be able to love ourselves enough to be in that joyful place, fully experience it, and then continue loving ourselves and those around us when those circumstances change. And that by doing that, we may find that actually that joy still is with us even when those circumstances change. Because joy is actually different from happiness. Happiness is fleeting. Happiness is circumstance dependent. Joy is happiness that is not dependent on what's happening around us. Joy is part of the wholeness of our true self. It's part of what we can discover when we turn back inward through a practice like Reiki and many, many other practices that have been, built out of the human experience of these things over time and in many different places. I wanted to read a passage from Sonia's book, The Body is Not an Apology, The Power of Radical Self-Love. This is the original version. As I said, the revised version and workbook are due out in stores any minute now. I have my copy on order. Highly recommend it. But let me just read you this passage and see if you can feel where inside of this, these perspectives on compassion and the way in which compassion or radical self-love is a pathway to our collective and individual freedom. Sonia says that a radical self-love world is a world that works for every body. Every body. Creating such a world is an inside-out job. How we value and honor our own bodies impacts how we value and honor the bodies of others. Our own radical self-love reconnection is the blueprint for what author Charles Einstein calls the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. It is through our own transformed relationship with our bodies that we become champions for other bodies on the planet. It is through our self-compassion that we become capable of extending compassion to others and acting on that compassion. As we awaken to our indoctrinated body shame, we feel inspired to awaken others and to interrupt the system that perpetuate body shame and oppression against all bodies. There is a whisper we keep hearing. It is saying that we must build in us what we want to see built in the world. When we act from this truth on a global scale, using the lens of the body, we usher in the transformative opportunity of radical self-love, which is the opportunity for a more just, equitable, and compassionate world for us all. This is liberation work, people. This is what was understood by the founder of the system of Reiki, Mikao Usui, and all of the many, 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 many people who had the courage to experiment, to practice, to try on for size, a new way of being in the world. Is it possible for us to live our lives, to move through the world as an embodiment of self-compassion and compassion to others? True to our way in our being and doing this diligently, rooted in gratitude and unattached to our anger and our fear. Yeah, it's very possible. And we do it in small moments just for today. We choose moment by moment. And when we choose a different path, when we choose a path of disconnection, a path of clinging to the anger and the fear rather than simply allowing it to inform us and then move away, those aren't backslides. We're not doing it wrong in those moments, because the very next moment we have the choice again to turn back towards compassion, to take the lessons of those experiences and integrate them into a deeper form of compassion for ourselves and others. And then we put that into action in the world. We become an embodiment of that in the world as we make our decisions, as we take action, as we be in relationship. Yeah, we can do that in every moment. So I invite you today to make one small action, one small, tiny change that is in service of radical self-love, of self-compassion. One small thing, something you can achieve, something you can feel the success in that moment. Take a moment right now to brainstorm and write down what that small change might be, and then commit to making that change. And then observe the outcomes. Notice what happens as a result of making that choice. And as you choose to navigate that choice, may you be deeply provisioned for that journey. All right, that's me for this morning. I'm going to get ready for day 2 of this class. I look forward to seeing what kind of insights come out of that. Love you all. Goodbye.